In the Combat Information Center, two screens sit side by side like two witnesses in a courtroom. On the left, the radar draws a confident white line. Target inbound, steady speed, steady heading, clean as a ruler. On the right, the electronic receiver hears nothing. No signature, no pulse, no voice from the sky. The operator looks back and forth, like someone trying to decide which friend is lying. Then the track splits into three. The line stays smooth, the symbols look official, and the room gets quieter, because everyone can feel it. The picture is not breaking down, it is being painted. Not jammed into static, not blinded into darkness, but fed a believable story that makes you move your weapons at the wrong time, toward the wrong thing, for the wrong reason. This is Battletech Declassified. Modern Warfare Explained. Here is the scary part. Modern defense is not only a contest of missiles and drones, it is a contest of truth, because every decision starts with one fragile assumption, that the dot on the screen is real. If the enemy can poison that dot, your whole ship becomes a strong athlete running with a blindfold, fast, expensive, confident, and useless. Sensor fusion is how navies take the blindfold off, not by trusting one sensor harder, but by forcing sensors to agree the way reality agrees. Think of it like checking a rumor. You do not believe it because one person said it, you believe it because multiple sources, different angles, and hard constraints all point to the same conclusion. And when those sources disagree, fusion does not pretend it knows. It marks doubt, slows the trigger, and asks a better question. What is consistent? What is impossible? And what is being manipulated on purpose? In this episode, we are going to follow that truth pipeline from raw noise to a true picture, and you will see why decoys and jammers win when you treat sensors like oracles, but lose when you treat them like imperfect witnesses that must be cross-examined. A track sounds simple, like a dot that moves, but it is really a tiny story your ship tells itself. The story has a name, a position, a speed, a direction, and a confidence level, like a profile page that gets updated every second. The problem is, that story is built from measurements that are never perfect. Radar gets reflections, infrared gets heat, electronic sensors get emissions, and each one is like a different sense in your body. Your eyes can be fooled by a mirror, your ears can be fooled by echoes, and your skin can be fooled by cold wind that feels like danger. A track is what happens when your ship tries to turn those messy sensations into one clean sentence. There is something there, and it is doing this. Now the Feynman version, if you can explain it simply, you own it. A track is a best guess that gets refined over time. It is not truth. It is a prediction machine. It says, if the target keeps going like this, it will be here next. That matters, because weapons need a future, not a present. A missile does not chase where the target was, it chases where the target will be. So when the enemy poisons tracks, they are poisoning your predictions, not just your picture. Imagine trying to catch a bus using an app that shows the bus moving, but the app has been hacked. The bus icon is smooth, believable, and wrong, and you end up sprinting to the wrong stop while the real bus passes behind you. That is what a poisoned track does to a warship. It turns the defense into a runner chasing a fake shadow, and the only cure is to stop asking, what does this one sensor say? And start asking, what does reality allow? So what does poisoned actually mean in combat terms? It means the enemy injects errors that look like normal uncertainty, and then they push those errors until they become decisions. Sometimes it is a ghost target that never existed. Sometimes it is a real target wearing a fake mask, so it gets classified as harmless. Sometimes it is a track that is real at the start, then slowly gets nudged off course like a shopping cart that drifts 1 centimeter at a time until you are aiming at empty air. The poison works best when it feels boring, when the screen still looks tidy, when the software still draws smooth lines, when the symbols still have the same font and the same confidence color. Because humans are pattern lovers, if the interface looks normal, the brain relaxes. Here is the key idea. Poison tracks are not about making you blind, they are about making you sure. Jamming often screams something is wrong, but poisoning whispers everything is fine. It is like a scam email that is almost perfect. The grammar is clean, the logo looks right, and the only purpose is to make you click before you think. In a fight, that click is a missile launch, a radar mode change, A course correction, a priority swap. The enemy does not need to defeat every sensor. They just need to defeat your trust. That is why fusion matters, because fusion is basically a trust machine. It asks, which pieces of this story are supported by more than one sense? And which pieces would require physics to bend? When you force a track to survive multiple tests, the poison has fewer places to hide, and the first thing that changes is not the accuracy, it is the decision quality. The ship stops spending shots on ghosts. Let's talk decoys, because decoys are the enemy's favorite way to create believable lies. A decoy is like a ventriloquist dummy for your sensors. It tries to sound like a real threat, look like a real threat, and move like a real threat, just long enough to steal your attention. Some decoys are physical, little objects that reflect radar or glow hot to trick infrared. Some are digital, signals designed to create fake returns. The important part is not the hardware, it is the goal. Decoys try to become the loudest kid in the classroom, so the teacher looks away from the quiet kid doing something dangerous. Here is the simple analogy. Decoys are fake social media accounts that all like and share the same post to make it trend. If your algorithm trusts popularity, it gets hijacked. If your ship trusts a single strong radar reflection, it gets hijacked. Fusion changes the rule from strong signal wins to consistent signal wins. A real aircraft, a real missile, a real drone. It leaves multiple footprints. Timing that fits. Motion that makes sense. Emissions that align. Heat patterns that do not teleport. A decoy can imitate one footprint really well, sometimes two, but it struggles to imitate all footprints without contradictions. That is the crack fusion looks for. The tiny mismatch. The reflection that moves like a balloon but claims to be a missile. The heat that spikes but has no aerodynamic logic. The emitter that is there but cannot be triangulated. And once you learn to look for contradictions, decoys stop feeling like monsters and start feeling like cheap costumes. Now, jamming. And this is where people get confused. Jamming is not always a wall of noise. Sometimes it is, like someone turning on a leaf blower next to your microphone. But the more dangerous jamming is selective, polite, and targeted. It arrives exactly when you need clarity. It hits only certain bands. It nudges timing. It creates gaps that look like normal clutter. It is like a pickpocket in a crowd. You do not notice the theft. You only notice the missing wallet when you try to pay. In combat, you notice jamming when you try to commit, when you need classification, when you need a firing solution, when you need the track to stop wobbling. Jamming tries to reduce your sensor from measuring reality to guessing, and guessing spreads like disease, because one sensor's uncertainty infects the whole picture if you treat the system like a single brain. Fusion helps because it lets you route around damage. If radar is noisy, you lean on passive sensing and geometry. If communications links degrade, you lean on local consensus. If one node gets blinded, others can still see. It is the same principle as navigation. If your GPS dies, you do not panic if you also have a paper map, road signs, and a sense of direction. Jamming wins when your system has one dominant sense. Fusion wins when your system is multi-sense by design, and when it treats disagreement as a signal, not as a nuisance. Because the moment two sensors disagree in a specific pattern, that pattern itself becomes information. It tells you where the enemy is pushing. Why is all this lethal? Because defense is a cue, not a magic shield. Your ship has limited radar time, limited track processing time, limited weapons, limited operators, limited seconds. When tracks get poisoned, the queue fills with junk, and the system starts making trade-offs under stress. It is like an emergency room receiving fake patients. The doctors still work hard, but the real patient waits longer, and the outcome gets worse, even though everyone is doing their job. That is what deception does in a saturation fight. It steals decision bandwidth first and kills you with that theft second. This is where true picture becomes more than a slogan. It becomes doctrine. If your picture is wrong, your weapon efficiency collapses. Your interceptors go to decoys. Your high-end missiles get wasted. Your close-in defenses get overwhelmed at the wrong moment. And the enemy does not need perfect deception to cause that. They only need enough confusion to slow your sorting. The brutal reality is, modern attacks are not always about making you fail to see. They are about making you see too much, then making you choose wrong. Fusion is the discipline that keeps the queue clean. It is the bouncer at the club door. It does not let every credible-looking track inside. It asks for multiple IDs. And when the bouncer is good, the whole night goes differently. The ship stops reacting to every flicker and starts reacting to the few things that survive cross-check. The next step is the trap almost every system falls into, trusting one sensor like it is the boss, and that is where the poisoning becomes easy. Most defense failures start with a simple human habit. We pick a primary sensor and treat it like the truth speaker. Radar is often that sensor because it feels concrete, it draws clean geometry, it looks like math. But one sensor thinking is like driving with only your eyes and ignoring your ears. You can still crash because you did not hear the siren. A single sensor always has a favorite kind of lie. Radar loves reflections. Infrared loves heat tricks. Electronic sensors love spoofed emitters. And when you build your whole picture around one sense, the enemy only needs to master one lie. Fusion flips the mindset from which sensor is best to which sensor contradicts the lie. That is a huge shift. Instead of crowning a champion, you build a jury. You let sensors vote, but you also weight the votes, because not all sensors are equally reliable in every situation. If the sea is cluttered, radar may be shaky. If the sky is hot, infrared may be noisy. If the enemy is silent, electronic sensing may be blind. So the fused picture is not one sensor plus decoration. It is a living compromise that adapts. The best mental model is not a single camera. It is an investigation board. Pins, strings, timestamps, angles, and constraints. When the board gets richer, the enemy has to work harder to keep the lie consistent. And consistency is expensive. That is why the war for truth is not won by stronger sensors alone. It is won by better logic about uncertainty. To see how fusion builds truth, you need to understand what each sense is good at and what it is terrible at. Radar is great at range and motion. It measures time of flight. And Doppler, it can see far, but it can be fooled by clever reflections and clutter. Infrared is great at heat signatures. It can spot engines and hot bodies, but it can be fooled by flares, background heat, and weather. Electronic sensing is great at hearing emitters. It can detect radars, data links, guidance signals, but it goes quiet when the enemy goes quiet, and it can be spoofed if you treat any emission as a confession. None of these senses is truth. Each is a biased witness. Fusion is what happens when you stop asking one witness to describe the whole crime scene and start asking, where do their stories overlap? If radar says a target is here, and infrared says there is heat there too, and electronic sensing hears a matching emitter, the confidence rises. If radar says there are 3 targets, but infrared sees nothing, confidence drops, and the system should behave differently. Maybe track, maybe wait, maybe allocate cheaper interceptors, maybe demand another angle. This is the heart of the episode. Fusion is not only combining data, it is combining doubt. It turns uncertainty into a managed resource, like budgeting fuel. And once you can budget doubt, you can stop spending your best shots on your worst information. Next, we will go one level deeper. How the system decides which measurement belongs to which object. Because that matching step is where a poisoned track often sneaks in wearing the wrong name. Even if every sensor was perfectly honest, you can still die from a different kind of lie. The lie of time. In fast fights, truth has an expiration date. A radar sweep might be a second old. A data link packet might arrive late. An infrared frame might drop, and your true picture becomes like yesterday's weather report, accurate when it was written, dangerous if you act on it now. Think of trying to catch a falling glass. If your brain sees it a fraction late, your hand closes on air. A ship does the same thing. It is constantly trying to catch a moving world, and the moment your timing slips, tracks start to drift from reality, not because the enemy is clever, but because physics is unforgiving. This is why poison tracks are so powerful in modern combat. They do not need to invent a whole fake world. They can just exploit timing gaps. If one sensor updates quickly and another updates slowly, you get a split brain. The picture looks smooth, but it is stitched together from moments that never existed at the same time. It is like editing a highlight reel from different games and pretending it is one play. Sensor fusion is supposed to solve this, but only if it treats time like a first-class ingredient, not an afterthought. It has to ask, when was this measurement taken? How fresh is it? How fast can the target change? And then adjust confidence accordingly. Because in a saturation fight, the most expensive mistake is acting fast on stale certainty, and the next step in our story is where the system tries to keep the timeline coherent and often fails. Now stack saturation on top of timing, and the problem becomes brutal. Saturation is not only too many drones, it is too many decisions per minute. Your ship has a limited number of track updates it can process, a limited number of targets it can prioritize, a limited number of interceptors it can assign, and a limited number of human brains that can stay calm. When deception enters that environment, it is like pouring sand into a machine with spinning gears. The gears still spin, the display still updates, but friction grows, queues form, and small delays turn into big failures. In simple terms, saturation turns every little doubt into a bill you have to pay, and deception makes sure you pay it at the worst moment. A helpful metaphor is a supermarket with one cashier. If 10 real customers arrive, it is manageable. If someone sends 50 fake shoppers with full carts of nonsense, the line becomes chaos, and the real customer with medicine for a sick child gets stuck behind a mountain of junk. That is exactly how poison tracks kill. They clog the line. They do not need to be perfect, they just need to be plausible enough to consume attention. That is why true picture is really true priority, because the defense wins by spending its limited time on the few threats that matter. Fusion is the gatekeeper that keeps the line clean, but only if it can quickly identify which tracks are weak, which are strong, and which are suspiciously confident. The next segment is where we stop thinking of fusion as mixing sensors and start thinking of it as protecting decision bandwidth. Most people imagine sensor fusion like pouring 3 cups of water into one bigger cup. More data equals more truth. That is the wrong mental picture. Fusion is more like building a chair, not stacking wood. You need the legs to agree on where the ground is, or you sit down and collapse. The purpose is not volume, it is coherence. Fusion asks, do these measurements fit one real object moving through one real world? If yes, confidence rises. If no, confidence drops, and the system should behave more cautiously. So the superpower of fusion is not that it sees everything. It is that it can say, I do not trust this yet, and it can do that faster than a human can. Here is the Feynman version. Sensor fusion is how you avoid being fooled by a single sense. You would never trust only your eyes when crossing a street. You also listen for engines and feel for vibration, because one sense can be tricked. A warship is the same. Radar might see a target, but IR does not see heat, and ESM does not hear emissions, so the system should treat that track like a rumor, not a verdict. Or radar might be noisy, but IR and ESM agree strongly, so the system can still build a reliable picture. The point is, fusion turns a messy argument into a structured debate, with rules, weights, and checks. And those rules are where the truth war is won or lost, because deception tries to exploit your rules, not your sensors. Next, we go into the most fragile step of all, matching measurements to objects, the moment where tracks get their identity. Imagine you dump a basket of socks on the bed. Black, white, gray, some almost identical, and you have to pair them perfectly in 30 seconds. That is what data association feels like inside a combat system. Multiple sensors produce multiple detections, and the fusion engine has to decide which detection belongs to which track. If you match wrong, you create track swaps, duplicates, or ghosts. One real drone becomes 2 tracks, or 2 drones get merged into one, or a decoy steals the identity of the real attacker. This is why poisoning is so effective. It aims at the pairing step. If the enemy can make 2 objects look similar enough for long enough, the system makes a clean, confident mistake. A simple way to explain association is this. The system is playing a constant game of same object or different object, using clues like position, speed, direction, and sensor signatures. But clues can be ambiguous, especially in clutter, especially in jamming, especially when targets cross paths. So the fusion engine uses prediction. It says, if this track was real, where should it be now? Then it compares the new measurements to that predicted spot. That is good, but it also creates a trap, because once a track has a prediction, the system starts to favor measurements that fit the prediction, even if the world changed. Humans do the same. We fall in love with our first story. Good fusion must be humble. It must allow the story to be challenged, especially when multiple sensors disagree in the same direction. In the next segment, we add the missing ingredient, a confidence score, basically a truth meter, and why it must be earned, not assumed. Every track needs a "how sure are we" number, because without it, the system treats a rumor like a fact. Think of confidence like a credit score for targets. A brand new track is like a new customer with no history. You do not hand them the keys to the vault. A track that has been seen consistently by multiple sensors, with motion that matches physics and with signatures that agree over time, that track earns trust. A track that appears suddenly, behaves oddly, or is only supported by one shaky sensor should have low trust, even if it looks clean on the screen. The most dangerous display is one that makes low-confidence tracks look high confidence because it tempts the operator to just act. This is where the true picture is built, not from one perfect measurement, but from repeated cross-checks that raise confidence gradually. In a healthy system, confidence is hard to earn and easy to lose, like trust in a relationship. One inconsistency does not always mean the track is fake, but it should change how you spend resources. Maybe you assign a cheaper interceptor. Maybe you hold fire for one more update. Maybe you ask another sensor for confirmation. Maybe you shift a picket drone's viewpoint. The key is proportional response. Fusion gives you a slider, not a switch, and that is how you stay alive in uncertainty. But there is a deeper danger than low confidence. It is false high confidence when the system feels sure for the wrong reasons. That is what we tackle next. False certainty is when the system looks confident because it is internally consistent, not because it is externally true. A poisoned track can be smooth, stable, and neatly updated, like a forged document with perfect handwriting. Humans love smoothness. We confuse clean with correct. Computers can do the same. They can keep updating a bad track in a way that looks mathematically elegant, and the operator's brain relaxes. This is called automation bias in plain language. If the machine looks calm, we assume the world is calm. In a fight, that is lethal, because the enemy's job is to keep your interface calm, while reality is about to punch you, is less than #0. 2# is greater than. The antidote is not to distrust automation blindly. It is to demand that confidence comes from independent agreement. Fusion has to be designed so that one sensor cannot carry the whole story alone, especially under known stress, clutter, heavy electronic attack. It must show uncertainty honestly, not as noise, but as a meaningful warning. A great mental model is a jury that requires more than one witness, and if the witnesses are too similar, their agreement counts less. That is how you avoid being fooled by coordinated lies. In the next part, we move from scoring truth to defending truth. Fusion as an immune system that hunts for patterns of deception and not just single bad dots. If confidence scores are the thermometer, then fusion needs an immune system that can spot when the whole body is being poisoned, because deception rarely shows up as one obvious fake dot. It shows up as a pattern, a weird rhythm, a set of tracks that behave like they were generated by a script instead of a pilot, a cluster that appears at the exact moment your radar mode changes, or a too perfect steadiness in conditions that should be messy. The human brain is decent at pattern recognition, but it is slow, and it gets emotionally hijacked in a swarm. A fusion engine can do something humans struggle with. It can constantly compare the present picture to the normal picture, like a doctor comparing your blood work to your baseline, and it can flag the kind of mismatch that screams manipulation, not randomness. Feynman simple. Fusion as immunity means it does not only ask, is this track real? It asks, does this whole story fit reality? Imagine you run a store, and one customer trying to steal is hard to catch, but a group of customers all paying with the same weird pattern of receipts is easier to flag because the pattern is the giveaway. Deception systems often repeat fingerprints, even when they look clever, because they are constrained by physics, timing, and resources. Fusion hunts for those fingerprints, not with drama, but with relentless bookkeeping. And that changes the fight, because now the enemy has to spend effort not only making fake tracks, but making fake tracks that survive cross-checks and look statistically normal across time. That is expensive. Next, we zoom into one of the most powerful cross-checks of all, Geometry, because geometry is a witness that does not get intimidated by noise. If confidence scores are the thermometer, then Fusion needs an immune system that can spot when the whole body is being poisoned, because deception rarely shows up as one obvious fake dot. It shows up as a pattern, a weird rhythm, a set of tracks that behave like they were generated by a script instead of a pilot, a cluster that appears at the exact moment your radar mode changes, or a too-perfect steadiness in conditions that should be messy. The human brain is decent at pattern recognition, but it is slow, and it gets emotionally hijacked in a swarm. A fusion engine can do something humans struggle with. It can constantly compare the present picture to the normal picture, like a doctor comparing your blood work to your baseline. And it can flag the kind of mismatch that screams manipulation, not randomness. Feynman's simple. Fusion as immunity means it does not only ask, is this track real? It asks, does this whole story fit reality? Imagine you run a store, and one customer trying to steal is hard to catch. But a group of customers all paying with the same weird pattern of receipts is easier to flag, because the pattern is the giveaway. Deception systems often repeat fingerprints, even when they look clever, because they are constrained by physics, timing, and resources. Fusion hunts for those fingerprints, not with drama, but with relentless bookkeeping. And that changes the fight, because now the enemy has to spend effort not only making fake tracks, but making fake tracks that survive cross-checks and look statistically normal across time. That is expensive. Next, we zoom into one of the most powerful cross-checks of all, geometry, because geometry is a witness that does not get intimidated by noise. Triangulation is the oldest truth trick in the book, and it is still brutal. One sensor can be fooled because it has one viewpoint, like watching a magic trick from the front row. Two sensors from different angles turn that trick into an awkward performance because the hidden string becomes visible. In combat terms, if you can observe the same target from multiple separated points, you force a lie to be consistent in 3D space and in time, not just on one screen. That is hard. A poison track can look clean from one radar, but when a second receiver sees a different angle, the math starts to argue. And Fusion loves when the math argues, because disagreement is a clue. Here is the simple metaphor. Triangulation is like asking two friends to describe where they were when something happened, and then checking their phone GPS history. One person can lie smoothly. Two people lying smoothly in a consistent way is harder. Add timestamps and distance constraints, and the lie collapses. Fusion uses the same idea. It turns truth into a constraint satisfaction problem. If this object is here, then it must also be there relative to another sensor. And if the measurements cannot be reconciled without bending physics, confidence drops fast. This is why distributed sensing, including picket drones, can be powerful. But it also introduces a new challenge. Multiple viewpoints create multiple data streams, and the system has to fuse them without drowning. Next, we look at a clever approach, multi-static sensing, where one node illuminates and others listen, because listening is often harder to fool than shouting. Multi-static and distributed sensing sound like jargon, but the idea is simple. One transmitter sends energy into the world, and multiple receivers in different places listen for what comes back. It is like clapping once in a canyon and having friends spread out listening for echoes. The pattern of echoes tells you where the walls really are. In a combat system, this can create geometry that is very hard to counterfeit, because a fake return has to arrive at multiple receivers with exactly the right timing differences. And timing differences are like fingerprints. If deception is a costume, multi-static timing is the stitching. It is hard to fake under pressure without slipping. The Feynman version. The more separated listeners you have, the more the world has to make sense. A single sensor can be told a convincing story. A network of sensors demands a story that is consistent across the whole room. But here is the trade. More sensors means more data, more links, more latency risk, and more opportunities for missing pieces. That is why Fusion is not just combine everything. It is combine what you can trust and degrade gracefully when you cannot. The goal is resilience, like a sports team that can still play when one player is injured because the system has backups. In the next segment, we focus on a sensor type that often acts like a truth serum, electronic support measures, because hearing an emitter is different from seeing a reflection. Electronic sensing, the ship hearing, the battlefield, is powerful because it deals in intent. A reflection can be an accident. An emission is a decision. Someone turned something on. That makes it useful for truth checking because it gives you a different kind of evidence. Not, I see something, but something is actively doing something. The danger is obvious too. Silence is ambiguous, and deception can spoof emissions. So electronic sensing is not a magic lie detector. It is another witness with its own weaknesses. But when used correctly, it is the witness that can expose contradictions, like a suspect claiming they never called anyone, while your phone bill shows 3 calls at the exact time. Here's the simple model. Radar is like seeing footprints. Electronic sensing is like hearing footsteps. Footprints can be faked with a stamp. Footsteps are harder to fake without being present, especially if you have multiple ears in different places. Fusion uses this by triangulating emitters, checking if the voice matches the claimed location and motion. When it does not match, the system should not panic. It should downgrade trust, reclassify, and allocate attention to the tracks that survive cross-check. This is where the true picture doctrine becomes practical. Truth is not a feeling. It is agreement across different kinds of evidence. Next, we add another passive tool, infrared search and track style sensing, seeing heat without shouting. Because sometimes the best way to survive a deception fight is to stop broadcasting your own position. Passive sensing is like hunting with your lights off. You are not announcing yourself. You are collecting clues quietly. Infrared can do that. It can detect heat patterns, exhaust plumes, warm bodies against the sky, without necessarily blasting energy outward. That matters in a deception environment because active systems can be baited, provoked, and measured. Passive systems are harder to lead by the nose, but passive sensing comes with its own traps, weather, background heat, and deliberate heat tricks. So again, the theme repeats. No single sense is truth. Truth is the overlap. A good analogy is reading a room. If you only listen to what people say, you can get manipulated. If you only watch body language, you can get manipulated. But if words and body language agree, you get confidence. If they disagree, you investigate. Fusion does this with sensors. If radar claims a fast inbound missile but infrared shows no matching heat signature, the system should treat it as suspicious, not as urgent certainty. If infrared sees a hot, fast object, and radar also tracks it coherently, confidence rises quickly. The point is not that passive sensing replaces active sensing. It is that it adds a second narrative line that deception must keep consistent. Next, we move into the decision logic itself, how the system builds consensus across witnesses, because consensus is where truth becomes actionable. Consensus logic sounds philosophical, but it is really just disciplined skepticism. The system takes multiple measurements and asks, do enough independent witnesses agree that this is real, and real enough to spend resources on? The trick is that consensus is not majority vote. If 3 sensors are all downstream of the same corrupted input, their agreement is not independent. It is like 3 people repeating the same rumor from one source. It sounds loud, but it is still one voice. Good fusion tries to value independent evidence, different modalities, different angles, different failure modes, because independence is what makes agreement meaningful. The Feynman version, consensus, is how you prevent a single lie from controlling the whole defense. It is the rule that says, one sensor can start a track, but it cannot convict on its own. Then, the system builds layers, not in the old sense of layered defense missiles, but layered truth. Start with a hypothesis, verify with a second witness, stress test with timing and geometry, adjust confidence, and only then commit expensive actions. This is how fusion stops being a technical feature and becomes a survival behavior. But there is one more uncomfortable reality. The enemy learns your rules and tries to craft lies that pass your tests. Next, we talk about that at a high level, not how to do it, but how to recognize the shape of adversarial pressure, because your fusion engine must assume it is being gamed. A smart adversary does not try to break your sensors directly. They try to game your decision policy. They watch what you prioritize. They learn what patterns trigger high confidence. And then they try to produce the cheapest signals that still get treated as serious. It is the same way spammers study what gets past filters, or how gamblers learn which slot machine pays more often. The goal is not to fool reality. It is to fool your system's idea of reality. That is why True Picture is a moving target. The moment you deploy a new truth rule, someone tries to exploit it, and the battle becomes an arms race of trust. So, what does a defensive mindset look like? It looks like building fusion that expects manipulation and treats sudden perfection as suspicious. It looks like monitoring not only tracks but system behavior. Are we spending too much time on certain classes of targets? Are confidence scores inflating unnaturally? Are multiple sensors becoming correlated in ways they should not be? The simplest metaphor is a chess player. You do not only look at the board, you look at your own habits, because your habits are what the opponent attacks. Fusion has to do the same. Watch the picture and watch how it builds the picture. Next, we bring it down to an intuitive tool, anomaly detection. Because sometimes the fastest way to spot a lie is not to prove the truth. It is to notice what looks non-human and non-physical in motion and timing. Anomalies are the footprints of cheating. Real objects obey inertia, energy limits, sensor physics, and the messiness of the world. Poison tracks often struggle to reproduce that messiness convincingly. They might move too smoothly, update too perfectly, appear exactly at suspicious times, or cluster in unnatural geometries. Think about handwriting. A forged signature can look clean, but it often looks too clean. The tiny errors of a real signature, speed changes, pressure, imperfection, are hard to fake. Fusion uses the same instinct. It looks for statistical fingerprints of realism and flags what does not belong. Feynman's simple. Anomaly detection is your "this feels off" instinct, but automated and scaled. It does not say, "this is fake." It says, "this deserves doubt." And doubt is valuable because it preserves your limited attention for what matters. In a saturation fight, the system that survives is the one that can rapidly downgrade suspicious tracks, keep the queue clean, and keep real threats from hiding behind noise. And now we are ready for the next big shift in the episode, adding picket drones and forward sensors into the picture. They give you more eyes, but they also give you more data, more link fragility, and more opportunities for poison tracks to travel through the network. Next segment, we push the truth pipeline forward and see why seeing more is not the same as knowing more. Picket drones change the geometry of truth because they move the eyes forward, away from the ship, like sending scouts ahead instead of waiting at the castle wall. Suddenly, you are not trying to judge reality from one spot. You are judging it from a shifting web of viewpoints. That is powerful because deception loves single angles. But it is also risky because every new sensor is a new witness that can be confused, delayed, or simply wrong. So the value of pickets is not only that they see farther, it is that they see differently, and the enemy now has to sell the same lie to multiple observers who do not share the same blind spots. If a decoy looks convincing from the ship, a picket drone off to the side might see the mismatch in motion, timing, or silhouette, and that mismatch is where fusion gets its leverage. Here is the Feynman version. Picket drones give you more cameras, but more cameras do not automatically give you a true movie. If the cameras have different frame rates, different quality, and different delays, you can accidentally stitch together a film that never happened. So Fusion has to become a disciplined editor. It has to align timestamps, weigh reliability, and ask the hardest question of all. Is this disagreement telling me a target is fake, or telling me my network is broken? This is where True Picture becomes a system design problem, not a sensor problem. You are not only fighting drones and decoys, you are fighting the fog created by your own distributed data. The next step is the part most people ignore, the network itself, because the moment you spread sensors out, the links between them become the new weak point. The network is not a neutral pipe, it is a battlefield. Links drop, packets arrive late, bandwidth gets squeezed. And sometimes you get the worst kind of failure, partial truth. One drone reports something clearly, another goes silent, and the ship receives an incomplete story that feels oddly confident because it is missing the contradiction that would have lowered confidence. It is like getting only the first half of a witness statement, the part that sounds certain, while the second half, the part where they say, "Actually, I am not sure," never arrives. In a deception fight, Missing data can be as dangerous as false data because it changes what the system thinks is supported by consensus. So, a robust fusion system must treat communication health as part of truth, not as an afterthought. A simple metaphor is a group project where the loudest teammate speaks first and everyone else's messages fail to send. The group does not become smarter, it becomes confident in one incomplete narrative. Fusion needs a graceful mode, a way to say, "My witnesses are not all present, my certainty should drop, not rise." That means local fusion at the edge, basic consistency checks on the picket drones themselves, and clear rules on what to do when the picture is incomplete, such as shifting to cheaper engagements, holding fire for one more confirmation cycle, or tasking a different angle. The key is humility under degraded links, because arrogance is what deception feeds on. Next, we walk through the truth pipeline as a whole, from raw sensing to we pull the trigger, because the pipeline is where you either filter poison out or pour it straight into the decision cup. Think of the truth pipeline like a water purification plant. Raw water enters full of dirt, leaves, and microbes, and if you drink it at the intake pipe, you get sick fast. The plant works because it has stages: filtering, settling, chemical treatment, testing, and only then distribution. A combat system needs the same discipline. Raw detections come in noisy, ambiguous, sometimes contradictory. Then association tries to match them to tracks. Then confidence scoring ranks how trustworthy those tracks are. Then cross-check logic tests consistency across sensors and time. Then prioritization decides what matters now. Then engagement logic decides what is certain enough to spend weapons on. If any stage is sloppy, poison gets through, and the later stages will not magically fix it. They will just turn bad inputs into fast, bad outputs. Feynman simple. The system must earn truth one step at a time. The dangerous mistake is skipping steps when things get busy, because busy moments are exactly when deception is most effective. You can almost predict it. The enemy wants you to rush, so you stop cross-checking. That means the pipeline must be designed to keep its filters even under load. Not perfect filters, but minimum filters that preserve decision bandwidth. Sometimes that means the system chooses to be slower to commit on uncertain tracks while still being fast to track them, or it chooses to spend cheap resources on weak confidence targets while reserving premium shots for verified threats. This is not about being timid, it is about being proportional. Next, we address the human role, because humans can either strengthen this pipeline by acting like judges, or they can collapse it by trying to be the fastest sensor in the loop. Humans are not built to be real-time schedulers for hundreds of moving objects, especially not with alarms, stress, and adrenaline. In a saturation fight, the human brain becomes like a phone with 20 apps open. It heats up, it lags, and eventually it starts closing the wrong apps. That is why modern systems try to automate, but the danger is clear. Automation can amplify wrongness if the picture is poisoned. The human role has to shift from do everything to decide the rules of trust. Think of it like a referee. The referee does not run faster than the players. The referee enforces the rules that keep the game real. In true picture doctrine, the human should be the one who sets thresholds, monitors anomalies, and decides when the system is being gamed. The Feynman version is simple. The human should be the judge, not the stopwatch. The system can track faster than you. It can cross-check faster than you. But only a human can weigh consequences, interpret ambiguous intent, and decide what level of uncertainty is acceptable in context. A well-designed fusion system supports that by showing doubt clearly, showing why confidence rose or fell, and showing what evidence is independent versus correlated. It should help the operator ask better questions, not just press buttons faster. When that partnership is healthy, deception loses power because it must fool both the machine's cross-checks and the human's common sense. Next, we talk about the moment where truth becomes policy, rules of engagement, because that is where certain enough becomes a life or death threshold. Rules of engagement are the legal and moral guardrails, but in practice, they are also truth thresholds. At some point, you have to decide, do we treat this track as real enough to shoot? And that decision is never purely technical. A tight threshold reduces friendly fire and wasted shots, but risks reacting too late. A loose threshold reacts faster, but risks spending your magazine on ghosts. This is why poison tracks are such a strategic weapon. They force you into bad trade-offs. They try to push you toward either paralysis or panic. Either you refuse to commit or you commit too easily. Fusion helps because it gives you a continuous confidence scale, so your actions can be graduated instead of binary. You can shadow, you can probe, you can task a different sensor, you can allocate cheaper defenses, and only then escalate. A good analogy is airport security. You do not treat every bag the same. Low-risk bags pass quickly. Suspicious bags get secondary screening. Highly suspicious bags trigger a full response. That is proportionality. A modern warship needs the same logic, because shoot or do nothing is too blunt for a deception-heavy fight. Fusion makes proportionality possible by turning uncertainty into a managed signal, not a hidden embarrassment. It can say, "This track is plausible, but weak," and that should trigger an action that is cheap and reversible, not your most expensive, irreversible choice. Now we are ready to bring it all together with a scenario, because the only way to feel the value of truth architecture is to watch what happens when everything hits at once. Picture a layered attack where nothing is individually impressive, but everything is timed to break your sorting. First, you get clutter and interference that makes the radar picture slightly less crisp, not blind, just annoyingly fuzzy. Then decoys appear in patterns that look like a real inbound line, steady, clean, persuasive. Then a swarm of cheap drones comes in low and fast, mixed with a few higher quality threats that matter more. The trap is that your system wants to treat the cleanest tracks as the most real, but deception can make fake things look clean and real things look messy. The queue starts filling. Operators feel pressure. The temptation is to commit early just to feel in control. That is when the poison works, because it turns the desire for certainty into a weapon against you. Now watch what a fusion-driven defense does differently. It does not stare at the prettiest line. It asks for independent agreement. It compares radar to passive sensing. It checks if the geometry makes sense across picket viewpoints. It downgrades tracks that only exist in one modality under heavy interference. It flags clusters that appear in suspicious rhythms. It does not need to perfectly identify every object instantly. It just needs to protect decision bandwidth, keep the line clean, and keep the expensive shots reserved for tracks that survive cross-exam. The result is not a flawless defense. It is a defense that does not collapse into panic. The ship still has to fight, but it fights reality, not a story fed to its screen. Next is the key insight: why fusion wins even when it is imperfect, because the win condition is not perfect truth, it is fast correction. Sensor fusion does not stop lies by being omniscient. It stops lies by making lies expensive and short-lived. The enemy's best move is to keep you wrong for long enough to waste your time and weapons. Fusion shortens that window. It detects contradictions early, downgrades certainty quickly, and reallocates attention before the queue collapses. In that sense, truth is not a static picture. It is a rate of correction. A system that can admit, "I might be wrong," and adjust in seconds is safer than a system that insists it is right for 30 seconds. Think of navigation apps. The best ones are not the ones that never make a mistake. They are the ones that reroute instantly when the world changes. Feynman simple. Fusion wins by turning deception into a bad investment. If a decoy only steals 5 seconds of attention before it gets flagged, it is less useful. If jamming only reduces confidence rather than collapsing the whole picture, it is less useful. If poison tracks keep getting downgraded whenever they fail cross-check, the enemy must escalate, spend more resources, take more risk, and expose more signatures. That is the hidden payoff. Truth architecture forces the attacker to show their hand. And once the attacker shows their hand, your defense becomes smarter, not just stronger. Now we land the episode with the core doctrine: what true picture really means, and why picket drones seeing more does not matter, unless you can prove what is real. True picture is not a sharper radar screen. It is a philosophy of combat where you treat every track as a claim that must earn trust. It means your system values independent evidence over loud signals, consistency over prettiness, timing over smoothness, and humility over false certainty. It means you build truth in layers, associate carefully, score confidence honestly, cross-check across modalities, detect anomalies, and degrade gracefully when links weaken. Most of all, it means you protect decision bandwidth. Because the enemy's easiest win is to make you spend your attention on fiction. In a world of decoys, jamming, and swarms, the fleet that survives is not the fleet with the biggest weapons. It is the fleet with the best discipline about what it believes. So the takeaway is simple enough to remember. The war is not only about seeing, it is about knowing. Seeing more can even be a trap if it floods you with untrusted data. That is why sensor fusion is becoming the front line. It is the truth engine that keeps the kill chain synchronized under stress. And it connects directly to the next question your binge link teased. Picket drones can push your eyes forward and widen the net, but that only matters if your truth pipeline can separate signal from poison fast enough to keep the queue from collapsing. Because in the end, the scariest moment is not when the screen goes dark, it is when it stays bright and confident while reality is about to hit.